Black Market Vintage is a Brooklyn, New York based concept shop inspired by vintage and antique objects from across the African diaspora. So we're dealing with a lot of objects that are one of a kind, things that are no longer in production, things that are no longer maybe in print. And so thinking about how we assess value. I mean, if I were a keychain maker or a printmaker, I can assess the value of my own thing that takes into account the market, the labor, my materials, my overhead, etc. I think that when you're dealing with things that have historical, communal, aesthetic, historical value, that kind of shifts. So we're not just dealing with the actual thing, but the ways that it survived, its provenance, its context, what are the stories that it's connected to. And so I think it just makes the ways that we think about this concept of value a lot more complicated.
When we come into the mix, we're bringing a whole host of historical context, a whole host of personal context, familiar context, that then we bring to it, and we may have a different sense of value. And so, simple as, a damaged picture, original photograph of Malcolm X, where someone's willing to throw it away because it has water damage on it or damp staining. But something like that is invaluable to me because the photo was taken on a street in Brooklyn, on Fulton Street, where, it's a couple blocks away from our store. And so value really is something that we contend with in a lot of ways.
I grew up picking with my mother, stopping on the side of the road for gems that she saw and she liked, she wanted to upcycle, going to vintage shops, going to thrift shops, going to flea markets, and it was just a shared hobby between the both of us. Met Jannah, introduced her to that world and that hobby of mine, and at first there was a little bit of reluctance and I guess more questions like,
I didn't know if vintage was for me. It wasn't quite my style, and I was like, oh, that's other people's stuff. That's kind of weird. And so, but once we started hanging out, and her pastimes became our pastimes, and we would go to thrift stores or flea markets or different, pop-up events around vintage, we really started to realize that, the folks that were there, some of the artifacts that were there, the people shopping, a lot of folks didn't look like us. And so, Black Market came from a space of need, and we figured, why not create the thing that we wish we had? And so that's when the journey started. One of the challenges right off the bat that Kiyanna mentioned was this piece of targeting, like who's going to be our target audience, and then speaking directly to them, but also speaking to them unapologetically. And so there's like no half-stepping. We weren't just going to do this and give it a funky name that kind of read a little black, but not really, hone in on our community. We were like, we are here to serve our community, to highlight our histories, our narratives, and once we leaned in, it was no longer like an issue or something that we had to navigate.
And the kinds of conversations we were having in the beginning were around like, are we pigeonholing ourselves? What does it mean to have a niche in a specific world or industry? But I think in specifying our market, specifying who we're talking to, specifying the voice, our world has expanded in a lot of ways. I don't think that the work has shrunk at all. We don't feel limited in any way, more boxed in.
And I would say one additional piece is that the community has held us down. Like literally, figuratively, spiritually, financially, the community has held us down. Some of the biggest breaks that we've gotten in the very beginning of this journey have been by Black women, whether it be, I work at this magazine, I would love to do a feature, or I work here and I would love to do this. That is the piece where it's just like we've been so privileged to be able to not only tap into, but also cultivate this community that we try to, we hold each other down. For us, it's so important that when we work with other vendors, photographers, we're working with, cultural, creatives, we try to make sure we're working with folks of color. We try to make sure we're working with Black folks because that is so important that the whole community will lift each other up as we grow. And I think that really has been a mantra for us because, we wouldn't be here without the community.